167 days. That's how long Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Home Minister Amit Shah have denied the people of Kashmir the same rights of access to the internet that the rest of India enjoys. Last week, the Supreme Court, in a judgment that should have come much earlier, told the government that this is not acceptable. Specifically, it ruled that freedom of speech and expression and the freedom to practice any profession or carry on any trade, business or occupation over the internet enjoys constitutional protection under Article 19, and that any internet ban the government imposes, quote, should be in consonance with, unquote, the reasonable and proportionate restrictions which the Constitution envisages. Having made this important point, however, the court sadly stopped short of ordering the government to restore to the people of Kashmir their freedom to communicate and speak via the internet. Instead, it directed the government to merely review its current order within a week. Predictably, the government went ahead and conducted a so-called review and, of course, equally predictably, concluded via an official order earlier this week that the ban would continue. Today, in a new order, the Jammu Kashmir government has relaxed the ban a teeny-weeny bit by allowing people in 2 districts of the valley to access a limited number of so-called whitelisted sites, which, surprise, surprise, include no news sites or social media of any kind. So where do these government orders leave the people of Kashmir, not to speak of the rule of law? That's what we will discuss in this episode of Beyond the Headlines. At a time when the judiciary has been reluctant to act as a check on the abuse of power by the government, the Supreme Court's judgment on the impermissibility of an indefinite internet ban was, I suppose, a welcome first step. But the ease with which the government has simply brushed aside the spirit of the Supreme Court's concerns tells us that India's judges will have to be blunter and bolder if they are to play their constitutionally mandated role of upholding the rights of the people. Just so that we are clear about what we are talking about, I'm not going into the rights and wrongs of the decision to nullify Jammu and Kashmir's special status under Article 370 of the Constitution, nor will I go into the legality of the abolition of J&K's statehood or its bifurcation into 2 union territories. Instead, I want to focus on the Communications Blockade that is now into its 6th month. In anticipation of public opposition to the scrapping of Article 370, the Modi government issued an as yet unpublished order declaring a complete communications blockade on the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir with effect from the night of August the 4th, 2019. This meant, first, that the internet was snapped, including leased lines and all broadband connections. 2, that all mobile telephony, voice, messaging and data was blocked. And 3, even landlines were switched off. This kind of a blockade has never happened before, not in Kashmir or any other part of India. And it took 5 weeks for the first step, the blockage of landlines, to be reversed. So for 5 weeks, the people of Kashmir were completely cut off from the world and, equally importantly, from each other, not even having access to something so basic as a landline. It took a total of 10 weeks before postpaid mobile services were resumed in the middle of October 2019. Simple SMSs were switched on earlier this month in January 2020 for postpaid connections, but until today, that is January 18th, prepaid mobile connections were banned. That ban has now mercifully been lifted, and 2G data services for access to 153 approved websites on postpaid mobile connections has been allowed in 2 districts, Kupwara and Bandipora. Of course, broadband internet across the Kashmir Valley remains banned, except for a small relaxation announced on January the 18th, providing access to companies engaged in software services. This means the vast majority of students in the valley still cannot use the internet to study or to apply for courses and jobs. The vast majority of farmers and craftspeople and businessmen cannot use the internet for basic commercial needs. Doctors can't use the internet to better diagnose their patients. Families and friends can't use the net to communicate with one another. A fate Information and Broadcasting Minister Prakash Zavadekar had once described as the worst form of punishment that you could ever subject a human being to. I urge you to think of all the reasons you've turned to the internet in the past 167 days and then reflect on what the blockade has meant for ordinary Kashmiris. The communication ban was raised in the Supreme Court in August last year, but it took the court nearly 5 months to rule that an indefinite ban on accessing the internet was not allowed. I found it shocking that during the course of the hearings in the Supreme Court, the government at first flatly refused to even share with the court its written orders suspending internet services, and when it finally agreed to share these, the bench was compelled to record that it had not been provided with the full set of orders. The issue of written orders is important because those orders then become the basis of a judicial challenge to the government's decisions. So, what better way to avoid someone questioning your arbitrary and draconian policy in court than to simply keep your orders hidden? I suppose we have to be grateful to the Supreme Court for calling this bluff last week and insisting that the government has to publish any order restricting access to the internet. So this week, after being compelled by the court, the government did finally make public its order continuing with this internet ban for Kashmir. But I have to say its reasoning and logic is so ridiculous that I'm hardly surprised they wanted to keep it hidden. Let me quote the opening passage of the order dated January the 14th, 2020, so you get my drift. Whereas the police authorities have brought to notice material relating to the terror modules operating in the UT of J&K, including handlers from across the border, and activities of separatists, anti-national elements within, who are attempting to aid and incite people by transmission of fake news and targeted messages through the use of the internet to propagate terrorism, indulge in rumor-mongering, support fallacious proxy wars, spread propaganda and ideologies, and cause disaffection and discontent. Hence, the internet has to be banned in the valley. Now, this order was issued by the Jammu and Kashmir Home Department, but don't be fooled for even a second. The J&K administration answers to the Union Home Ministry, whose supremo is Mr. Amit Shah. So please understand, this is his policy and his reasoning for why the Kashmiri people should continue to be denied access to the internet. Of course, Mr. Shah is a considerate man, so people in the valley are welcome to use the internet, but in supervised sessions at government-run internet kiosks. But I'd like him to try that as an experiment in Ahmedabad or Surat. He should switch off the internet and compel anyone who wants to use it to queue up at a government office, and then do that for 6 months, after which he grants them access only to 153 whitelisted sites. But let me come back to the core logic of the ban. The government says we need to ban Kashmiris from using the internet because it's being used to spread fake news and rumors. Really? This from a government run by a party whose ministers and leaders have used the internet to spread not just rumors and fake news, but also propaganda inciting hatred on the basis of religion. As everyone feared, whatever restoration of the internet has come allows access only for so-called whitelisted sites. We went through the list of 153 sites, which is the sum total of what Modi and Shah will allow Kashmiris to access, and these are mainly email, banking and travel booking sites, government sites, entertainment like Tata Sky, a few science and technical sites for scholars, and that's it. No YouTube, no news, no social media. I'm reminded of the radio sets that the North Korean government apparently provides to its citizens, which come preset to Radio Pyongyang and no other station. Apparently, our dear leaders see great value in the North Korean model of thought control. Notwithstanding its unwillingness to provide a clear and immediate remedy to the suffering people of Kashmir and the loopholes it came with, the Supreme Court's judgment on the lockdown is important for 4 reasons, though I doubt very much that the government is going to take note. First, With internet bans being resorted to up and down the country at the drop of a hat, this is perhaps the first time the Apex Court has tried to lay down rules of the road. Bans have to be reasonable and they have to be proportionate. The court should, of course, have been clearer and firmer, but I guess the times are such that we need to be grateful for small mercies. Second, the judgment also considered the issue of Section 144, which is the law that governments use to impose restrictions on the movement of ordinary citizens, and made some important observations about its abuse that will help citizens challenge the imposition of 144 in local courts. Third, the court said any shutdown order has to be published. And fourth, these shutdowns cannot be indefinite. In holding access to communication over the internet to be a fundamental right, the court has laid down a plausible test for any official attempt to limit access. It must meet the constitutional standard of what is called a reasonable restriction. And by no yardstick can the 6-month ban on broadband and mobile internet services in Kashmir, or this attempt to limit access to simply 153 sites, be called a reasonable restriction. The ban represents, in my view, a totally disproportionate response to any law and order threat. The claim that the ban on the medium is needed to curb the spread of rumors and fake news could easily apply to any medium of communication, including private conversations, and is totally ridiculous. If allowed to stand as a reason for restricting the internet in Kashmir, no part of India should consider itself safe. I want to leave you with a final thought. You must be wondering what the real reason is behind the government's reluctance to restore full access to the internet in the valley. Access of the kind that you and I take for granted. In my view, the target is not terrorism, but civil disobedience. Modi and Shah do not want to allow the people of Kashmir to freely communicate with each other and strategize on how to oppose what the government has done and is doing to them. That's why even in the Jammu region, where mobile data services are to be restored, and in the 2 districts in the valley, there will be a complete ban on social media access. The government is well equipped to deal with the threat of terrorism. It's been doing that since 1989. The government also knows how to handle stone pelters and other forms of violent protest. But what it does not want to confront is a Shaheen Bagh or a Tahrir Square in Srinagar. All its official policies towards the people, the internet ban, the arbitrary use of Section 144, the arrest of civil society activists and political leaders, is intended to ensure the political initiative does not pass into the hands of ordinary Kashmiri women and men. That is why political leaders who have been illegally arrested are being released on the condition that they sign a bond pledging not to even open their mouth and say anything about the current situation in Kashmir. That's why even government departments with an internet connection have to have their head of department sign a bond guaranteeing that their connections will not be used for any kind of social media communication. We see the same kind of government intolerance towards peaceful gatherings across India. It is so much easier, I suppose, to wield lathis and open fire on marching protesters. But what do you do when they adopt Gandhian methods of satyagraha? My hunch is that the internet ban in Kashmir is intended to postpone and eventually prevent a Shaheen Bagh in Srinagar's Lal Chowk. Everything else the government says about terrorism, handlers across the border, anti-national elements and fake news is simply a smokescreen. If you liked this video and you like watching The Wire on YouTube, please understand that we are able to do this important work only on the basis of your donations. So keep your donations coming. There's a link at the bottom of this video in the description with details of how you can donate. Please click there and show us your support. Thank you for watching.